Hi, I'm Everett. Welcome back to the shop. Today is another automotive repair video. It's for my car. I've got a 2010 Toyota Corolla with the 1.8 liter engine in it, 5-speed manual transmission, and the driver's side CV axle shaft where it comes out of the transmission is leaking. It's been weeping for a while. It's got to the point where I need to deal with it before I lose the transmission. Got the seal here. It took a little bit of fun to track one down just because sometimes the listings or whatever. Here's hoping this is the right one, because even at Toyota they kind of, were having trouble figuring out which one I needed. So one of the things we're going to do as well is the fluid needs changing. It's got 200,000 kilometers on it, and I figured we're in there anyway. You're supposed to be changing it every 50,000 kilometers in these things. And this is what it takes. Even still comes in a tin can. I thought this was really cool. It still comes in a metal can. LV 75 weight. All sorts of Japanese writing on the back that thankfully it's in English and a couple other languages as well. But I thought it was pretty cool. It still comes in a can. This stuff is like $75 a liter, but it's worth every penny. When we bought the car back in 2015, it had 100,000 kilometers on it, and it was kind of notchy and even actually almost grinding going into fourth. I figured, whatever. I was anticipating having to take it apart to redo synchros, and figured, why not? Let's just try putting the proper fluid in it, and lo and behold, it shifts fine now. So the previous owner must have changed the fluid and put the wrong stuff in it. So if you have a Toyota with a 5-speed, just this stuff, trust me, it's worth the money. So anyway, what I'm going to do is get the car up on stands, get the tire off, and we'll start changing that CV shaft seal. First things first, before you do anything, you always have to make sure that you got your car, when you put it up, seriously, put it on jack stands. Don't just leave it on the jack. I have a friend who was working on a trailer at home one time, doing hubs on it, and this is earlier or later last year, I guess, and he had jack stands for one side and left the other side on the jack. Things shifted on him, fell on him. Thankfully it didn't kill him, but it hurt him pretty badly, and he was off for a number of weeks from work. And it can happen to any of us. I'm not hucking stones, whatever. It's just, seriously, I'm not the biggest safety nut on the planet, but I also don't necessarily want to go through the rest of my life messed up from something I could have prevented. So anyway, we have it on jack stands. First things first is we'll pull the tire. Okay. Next step is I want to take this inner fender liner off just because it's in the way. And then we've got a push pin. And yeah, some push pins and a couple fasteners with 10 mil heads. Great. So we got, I guess 4 or 5 of these little push pins that go in underneath from the front. That one is 10 millimeter head. 10 millimeter head across the floor. Thankfully not down the drain. And then another push pin right here. There we go. That comes out of the way. So next step is we have to take this nut off. It is a 12 point on the end of the CV shaft. And if you look really closely right here, you'll see there's a bit of a stake mark where it's been indented to hold it and sort of lock it to keep it from coming loose. It goes in that little groove. You got to push it back and unpeen it a bit before you do anything. Now it really doesn't take much. Honestly, one of the easiest things to use is just a masonry nail. masonry nails are hardened, so they're handy for all sorts of stuff. If you're careful, you can also use them as a prick punch or a center punch. So now we need a 12-point socket. Now to take off this nut here, you need a 30mm 12-point socket, or, well, I don't have a 30mm 12, but I have an 1 3/16, which is pretty close. There you go, make sure it's going to come off nicely. Yeah, there we go. She's off. And my compressor's running, so I'm going to pause. Now this next step here, you're going to want to try to avoid messing up the ends of the threads. So because the shaft isn't wanting to slide out easily, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to give it a little bit of a nudge in the center with an air hammer and a punch on the end of it. You can use a regular hammer if you want. Hopefully it's not seized in there too badly. I mean, the car is 12 years old. So here it goes. Let's see how it goes. Let's give it a little bit of the WD in the splines. Yes, I realize this is actually more of a water displacer than a lubricant, but it's a light oil, so it'll work. Let's see. There we go. There we go. That was easy enough. So now the next step is to disconnect the knuckle here from the lower control arm. A number of ways you could do that. You can do undo the ball joint. There are 3 bolts down here that you can undo that hold the ball joint to the control arm. If we undo that, that runs a risk of lossing up our alignment. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to undo the taper on the lower ball joint. So rearrange things so you can see what I'm up to there, and be right back. Now, one of the fun parts about trying to do stuff like this is, again, trying to get a camera in a place where sometimes you have to be as well. So what we're going to do is we have our cotter pin here, or I guess some places in the world call them split pins. And I know I could undo it right here. We got three, I think those are actually studs, and then nuts on the bottom side to remove the lower ball joint. But if I disturb its position in relation to the lower control arm, I run the risk of lousing up my alignment, which I guess theoretically hasn't been aligned in a while, but still, rather not if I don't have to. One of these is kind of off at a twisty angle. I'm just going to break it off. I'm going to replace the cotter pins in here anyway. All right, we'll break off the other side, the other portion of it. A little bit of liquid suggestion. I'm using a soft face hammer, or a dead blow hammer, against the wrench. Sort of like a impromptu impact type wrench. So by doing that, we just basically sheared the end off the pin, off the split pin. So now by all rights, this should come up. I can take the nut off. Oh, there we go. So now, before I get too much further here, I'm just going to take a moment, pause the camera, and I'm going to, while this is still pressed into the, or well, taper locked into the knuckle here, I'm going to go from this side over here with a punch, and I'm just going to knock the remainder of that split pin or cotter pin out, just because it's still solid right now, and once I tap it to make it loose, I'm going to lose that. I'm going to lose that. All right, plan B, we're drilling it out. I don't want to wreck any punches doing this. There we go. All right, so that hole's cleaned out. All right, so what I've done is I got a nice long bar here wedged against the lower control arm, and on the other end up underneath the body next to the subframe. And so what we're going to do is we're going to push down on this while we apply a bit of force to the ball joint, at the knuckle where the ball joint goes in at the taper. I know there are special tools for this, but I do have one, but it's for a different make of vehicle, so it's not going to fit this one. So this is what we get. Okay, I'll admit this is easier to do on a hoist. So I say just you apply pressure with your pry bar and just rattle away at your knuckle there, either with a hammer. You can on a hoist or whatever, or if you have the special tool to separate the ball joint from knuckle, use it by all means. I just don't have one here. So now we can swing the lower control arm out of the way, and that allows us to move our knuckle back enough that we theoretically should be able to get our steering or CV shaft out. There we go. Right. So now that we're separated from this end, now's the time to pull the CV shaft out of the transmission case. And for that, I'm just going to rearrange the camera so you can see what we're up to. This step is one that you don't have to follow if you're just changing the seal up in here. However, I also do know this thing needs the fluid changed in it, simply because of mileage. Right here is our drain plug. It is a 24 millimeter, which is really close to 15/16. There we go. Oh, good. It's still fairly clear, not ugly looking, and I don't see a whole pile of filings in it, so that's a good sign. I could sit here and let it drip and drip and drip and drip and drip, but really, the vast majority of the oil has come out and would have washed the majority of whatever contaminants would be sitting in the bottom of the case. It's a drain bolt. It doesn't need to be torqued to yield, so snug and a little bit is plenty. There's a special tool for doing this, but I don't have it. It's a slide hammer type special tool, so this will have to do. There we go. There we go. Now it's starting to move. That's what we needed. Now it's starting to come out. Oh, yeah, she's a little stubborn yet. At the very least, this isn't like the old Ford Escorts. Well, the North American Escorts anyway, where if you had to always leave one Stevie shaft in place, else the diff would drop. So we'll get in here with our little pry bar. Try not to square up the bore too much. There we go. All right. There's our old seal. So there's our old seal. And we'll clean that bore up a bit and put our new one in. I think the downside of this is that have you all right where it might be easiest to swing to install. So this may be a little bit awkward. You'll probably have a better go of it if you're doing it yourself because you won't have a camera in the way. So here's our new seal. It goes into the bore. And just get started by hand. Now I'm going to use an 1 7/8 inch socket as a driving tool. You can use whatever you got. This will work for me. Bottom should be about right. I get to get the top now. Just about there. Actually, that should be just about there. Alright, we got our new seal in. That is now evenly set all the way around. So I've given the end of the shaft a little bit of a spritz with parts cleaner. Wiped off the splines and the sealing surface. And in you go. Just like that. So that end's installed. Flip back around to this side. I do realize that I have my steering column locked. And if I had moved it, that could have maybe given me a little bit more clearance, but that's okay. So you get your CV shaft in to the outer joint into the knuckle. Then you can push down on your control arm now, which is kind of nice. Up into the hole. There we go. Now I'm sure that there is a torque spec, and I'll look it up after. Yeah, I'll look it up after. But the biggest thing is you just want it tight. I mean, you don't want to break it off, but you got it tight, and then you got to make sure that you line up one of the little, when you get it tight, and then you line up one of the little castellated slots with your cotter pin hole. I mean, remember, it's a taper, right? So the tighter you go, the more it's going to lock in. But you also don't want to go crazy with it. There we go. Yeah, the bore's still a little bit dirty in there and rusty, so extra insurance for it to stay put. Pull down on the one side, and then whatever you do, don't do this. Just leave it like that. Fold it over. Fold it over so that it's less likely to slice somebody else open the next time they come in here. Granted, I realize chances are the next person in here won't be any of you. It'll be me. But there we go. Next step is the CV shaft nut, this guy here. The CV shaft nut through the hub is 160 foot-pounds or 216 Newton meters. Now that should get us close. Okay, 60. And then I've got this screwdriver here, which has led a fairly miserable existence because it gets to be brought out on occasions such as this. There we go. 160. And yes, Toyota does have a special staking tool for this. So do I. It's called a nice big hammer and a nice reasonably blunt punch. There we go. Sweet, we're staked. So at this point, what I need to do, if I were to finish off just the seal job, is put the inner fender liner on in here, and then the tire, and torque the tire on. But before we do that, because I can still get in here and get better light and access to the fill plug, I'm going to bring you in and show you where the fill plug is. So from underneath here, this is about the best angle I'm going to get you. Right here is our fill plug. And yes, it's kind of in the way, having the hydraulic line for the clutch right there for you to see it, but that's where it is. It's kind of interesting to try to fill one of these things too. I often will try doing it from the top when I've done this one in the past. Yeah, there we go. This thing has been leaking for a while, so I've had to check it a couple times in the last few months. There we go. There are two different ways you can fill this. You can use fluid evacuator and basically like one of those sucker squisher guns to squirt it in there, or you can go from the top with a tube off of a funnel. And truthfully, I am actually kind of lazy, so I prefer doing it that way. So I have actually got a couple of these suction type guns, and while you can actually use it to fill this thing and then squirt it into the hole, I'm actually kind of lazy and I prefer to do it this way. If I'm not in a rush, I'm not on flat rate here, so I can take my time. What I did was I just pulled the piston assembly out of it and then used the body of it as a well, basically as a funnel with a tube running into the transaxle. So to avoid wrecking them and to keep them reusable as containers after, I snitched the can opener out of the kitchen. Thankfully, I don't have to ask forgiveness or permission or anything, because I'm the one who does most of the cooking lately. The reason I do this is that it makes it easier to make a nice clean job of cutting the lid off completely afterward and using it as a storage container, because I really like them for that. They wind up something like this, really handy for pencils and stuff in the shop. And the transaxle on this thing takes 1.9 liters, so not only do we have the ability to let it dribble out of the hole, but I also know that it's, once I have 100 milliliters left in the last container, we're good. Alright, so we got our 1.9 liters in there, give or take. And we'll weasel this out of the hole. And yes, while I do realize this car is on a little bit of an angle due to the jack stands, there we go, we're good. There we are. Now apparently the torque spec for these plugs is 29 foot-pounds. Oops, come on you. There. Click. I heard it, you hear it? I keep calling it a skid shield, but really it's not going to protect much from skidding. It's more of a splash guard than anything. It slides up in there. And then again, we have two 10 millimeter headed, fairly coarse threaded screws. One up here, one at the front, one right up underneath the ABS cable, and then the little Christmas tree type fastener goes up behind the strut. There we go. And then all these four go up underneath in the front. There. Those are easy to get at. And then I just snugged up with the impact. These lug nuts are 80 foot-pounds worth of torque, so we don't want to over torque them. And there we go. We're done, which is good, because my wife needs to take this thing to work tomorrow. So I hope that was at least somewhat useful for you. Again, I did the transmission fluid at the same time as I did the seal just because it was due. However, you know, you can omit that step if you're just doing the seal. Otherwise, yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for those of you who want to subscribe. Thanks for coming by in general. It's cool to hear who comes by and in the comments, and various people from all over the world. It's really cool to hear. So otherwise, thanks for watching, as I say, and we'll see you next time.